Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand spanking new Jump Up Supercast Game Club Extra. I'd just like to say that we were supposed to do this a while ago, but we, took our time. We wanted to make sure it came out well. I'm your host, Ills, and joining me is my fellow Game Club Extra members, Will.
I sure do like playing RPGs.
Yeah. And Seth.
I do take my time.
Yeah, you certainly do. And we can definitely talk about that later. This time around, we're going to be talking about the Alliance Alive. And you might be thinking, wait a minute. If I heard the last episode, the next game was supposed to be Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning or whatever. And let me just, since I'm a man of my word, let me give you a very short review of that game. It's okay. I mean, it's just okay. It's aggressively boring at times, and that's why we didn't get to it. So we moved on to the Alliance Alive.
There was
Go ahead.
There was more interest in the story of the company than it was in the story of the game.
Yeah, you certainly did a deep dive.
He discovered Kurt Schilling and it changed his life.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I had more fun just reading the backstory of this game than I had the backstory of the lore of this game.
Yeah, because in that game, I mean, there's so much useless lore.
Yeah.
They wanted to build a world that multiple games would be set in, and then they went bankrupt. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even before that, what they built wasn't good enough, I think. Anyway, that aside, we played the Alliance Alive, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Indeed.
The Alliance Alive was developed by Cattle Call, originally published in Japan by Furio in 2017, and published worldwide by Atlas USA in 2018 for the Nintendo 3DS. We played the Alliance Alive HD Remastered Edition on Switch, right?
Yeah.
We all played that? Okay.
Yeah. Seth, did you play on PC?
And that was... Seth?
Did you play on PC, Seth?
No, I played it on Switch.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah, the superior, I think, way to play this game.
Yeah.
This is very much it has a handheld RPG feel to it, I think.
100%, yeah.
It was the remastered edition was published by NIS America and released for the PlayStation 4 and Switch for 2019. Released for the PC in January 2020, and most recently it was released on Android and iOS in February 2021.
How about
So
that?
surprisingly, we're on the ball somehow.
Topical.
Despite all our delays, we made it.
The delay made it topical somehow.
We're actually right on time. We're not delayed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all according to Keikaku.
Indeed. A brief history of Cattle Call, the developers. They previously worked on the Metal Max series, which is a series I kind of always wanted to try. I knew it was on Famicom and Super Famicom. It recently had like a new entry on PS4, I think. The Arc the Lad series, which is a big PS2 series that I never got to play. Another one that I wanted to play. They co-developed the DS remake of Dragon Quest IV, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most notably in relation to this game, they developed The Legend of Legacy, which is another 3DS JRPG, of which the Alliance Alive is regarded as sort of a spiritual successor to, or kind of a sequel to.
Yeah. Because I think... sorry. Yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the developer wanted this sequel, the exact sequel, to be like on powerful hardware, like a console, potentially, a much more powerful hardware. So that's why Alliance Alive just took on a different shape to what Legend of Legacy was.
Well, I mean, they were both on the 3DS.
Yeah. So that was the thing, yeah, because like he wanted a sequel that kind of like has more depth to it, but he didn't want all the criticism people had for the Legend of Legacy. He wanted it to be addressed in a sequel that was on more powerful hardware. So that was an interesting thing about this. It's like, or how it's formed, basically, like Alliance Alive as a game itself
Well,
Right.
as a spiritual successor. Rather,
I think that's curious then, because it's like Il said, it is on 3DS, right? But I think that
yeah,
for a lot of smaller developers, especially in this time frame, right? 2018 was this originally came out, or 2017, excuse me. The Switch, it was still unsure if the Switch would be the success it turned out to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like,
Yeah.
well, if Nintendo's next thing doesn't do well, right, we have to move the console, but HD development is a huge jump in cost, right? Do we have the resources for this? And so it seems like instead what they opted to do was to try to make that bigger thing on this hardware they knew and probably could keep costs lower on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And then coincidentally, the Switch took off and sort of it got a second chance at life through this, right? Because it, 3DS software in 2017 dropped off a lot faster than people thought it would because the Switch was so successful, which they couldn't have known, right? But
Right.
yeah.
that's why the HD remaster was nice.
Yeah, and they put it on PlayStation 4, PC,
Yeah.
and now Android and iOS.
Yeah, so plenty
So,
of
I
ways
mean,
to
they-
play it.
Yeah. They were assisted in development by Furyu, the publishers, and they gave general supervision. And they were also assisted in game design by Grezzo, which you might know from the Legend of Zelda remakes and Triforce Heroes. And we all love those games. That was kind of surprising to find out
Yeah.
that Grezzo worked on this. It's actually kind of funny because it seems like Grezzo worked on this while they were making Link's Awakening.
Yeah.
And that's a huge game. I mean, that was like a complete remake. So
Because this
maybe
was,
Grezzo's bigger than I think.
yeah, because this was also the time they were making Ever Oasis, right? Which is their original game. So I wonder
Oh yeah.
if it was just sort of like Grezzo knows how to get a lot of the 3DS in general, right? So I wonder if they were just useful, sort of how Monolith was helpful for HD development for a lot
Breath
of
of the
Nintendo
Wild.
games. Yeah, if Grezzo sort
Yeah.
of had that role in the 3DS.
Yeah.
Possibly. Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of interested in playing Ever Oasis now because I've liked a lot of what Grezzo's put out. So
Yeah,
maybe we'll get to it one day.
one day.
I think.
Go ahead.
Wait, is that the one with like the mermaid?
Yeah.
It's like the cat. Yeah, I've
There's a
played
mermaid?
Some of it.
Well, she's like a
there's a
water
mermaid
spirit.
spirit that-
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's the Oasis spirit, right? That's the idea.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, have you
I played some
played it
of it.
already?
Yeah, I played some of it. I haven't actually beaten it yet.
Oh,
But I played
okay.
the majority of it.
Yeah, I've never played
Interesting.
it though.
It's
so.
okay. Yeah.
Huh.
It's decent. It's a decent game, but it's I don't know why I fell off. But, yeah.
Probably because
I'll
it
probably get back
sucks.
into it.
Okay. Finally, the last thing I want to mention, and I did not know when we picked this game last, is that Yoshitaka Moriyama, the creator of the Suikoden series, actually worked on the script for this game. So somehow, some way, we managed to link our first two Game Club Extra episodes together, and I don't understand how that happened, but it's pretty freaking weird.
The man, he works in strange ways, Murayama.
Yeah, I mean,
Indeed.
he made us stalk him somehow.
Yeah.
Just make enough stuff and you'll get there one day.
Yeah,
Possibly.
definitely. So yeah, I mean that's the brief history of the Alliance Alive. We can talk about what do you guys want to talk about? We could talk about the aesthetic. We can talk about the mechanics. How you guys feel?
I'm cool with we can talk about the aesthetics, right? Because we talked about the HD remaster a little bit already, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind me asking, right? So up-res 3DS games can sometimes be a mixed bag, right? How did you feel about sort of the cleanup work that they did on this game?
I mean, I definitely felt that it definitely felt like a 3DS game, but it looked good. Like I love the art style. Like I didn't know that it was actually like a water style art to make this world, but I could feel it as soon as you know what I mean. I didn't know that was what they were going for, but it definitely showed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely, like, I feel so like the art style has played a huge significant role in like just allowing it to transition from a 240 pixel, I think it was 240 pixel 3DS game screen to like a 720 pixel HD game, like incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there are still some like elements to it that you can see like kind of like visual limitations here and there.
Yeah, it's
like,
a little muddled in some places.
Yeah, a little muddled. The draw distance is a bit weird as well. But that one, that never really bothered me at all. Like as they've managed to like up-res it pretty well. They managed to like the art style really still shines incredibly well through the HD screen. I haven't really seen the 3DS screen properly, but I don't feel as though I'm missing anything from it by just not having it on the 3DS screen.
Yeah.
So it does feel decent. Like it feels like a proper decent game. Visually, I should say. The chibi art style definitely plays a lot of it. Pulls a lot of weight in terms of like making it just look good.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of chibi art games, it's hard not to come to the comparison of making it, looking at Bravely Default, and that's a game we've all played, and it's sort of reminded me of that kind of game too.
Yeah. I think the thing that's interesting is like, because I think the thing that Bravely and this game both have is obviously the chibi, right? So the big head, right? And then the big eyes and the small mouths, especially on the characters, right? Sometimes there's a literal just like line across the face. But I feel like the thing that Alliance Live has to it is that like, maybe this sounds out of turn, but like there's a certain melancholy to the designs a little bit, right? Like all their eyes are sort of like big and are sort of like they almost feel like sunken in, right? Like they all sort of have this like I don't know. It's like they look almost like little dolls, but like little dolls that are like almost like they're not too cute, right? Like they sort of give them a little bit
like
of
depressed dolls.
a little bit like depressed dolls, sure. Which for the world makes sense, right? Because this is in the world of the game, it's most people are just barely scraping by, right? So I thought it worked well.
Yeah, speaking of the chibi art style compared to Bravely Default, I feel like these characters had a little bit more articulation to their models. I'm not sure, but I feel like, well, I don't remember Bravely Default that well anymore because it's been like 7 or so years, but that's what I remember of it.
Yeah.
It played to... So, sorry. So, like, I remember, like, one of the things that it plays to, sorry for interrupting, Will, is, like, a lot of the cutscenes are kind of... There are almost some cartoonishness. Like, you see, like, these, like, animated, like, sweat drops and, like, kind of, like, nose signs and shit like that. So, like, I feel so, like, that helps a lot in just kind of, like, and allowing it to feel natural and feel good compared to Bravely Default. Whereas, like, Bravely Default is, like, super, super serious. But, like, everything about the tone is super, super serious. But, like, they have, like, this kind of cartoonish chibi style, which historically is never really used to, like, talk about serious stories or serious games, etc. Which I feel is the, like, kind of separates the two and why it makes Alliance Alive look better than Bravely Default, because it just fits more. If that makes sense.
Sure. Well, I think it both come from the idea of how do we sort of translate the old sprites of RPGs right into a 3D
Yes.
world, right?
Yeah.
And, old RPGs would cover a ton of topics, right? But there was almost this level of distance, right? Where, like, because these sprites can only really emote in, like, 7 different ways, right? That your mind would fill in gaps, right? And as you get more and more closer, your mind has less and less space to fill in gaps, right? And so
that could be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think for older RPGs, that kind of space is good. Like, you being able to fill in the gaps makes you more invested in certain ways.
Yeah.
Whereas where you have very realistic character models, if they don't act like you want them to act, it feels dissonant.
Yeah. And I think that, like, for me, because this game has moments, right, where they do go for, like, full-on cutscenes, right? Like, the camera is moving and it's deliberately placed, right? Like, it's... And so there are times where, they're just flapping their mouths open, right? And there's no audio with it, right? And, like, that's where...
And I really wish there was audio.
Yeah. That's where there wasn't enough space for me to fill in that gap, right? Like, I felt like, oh, you're all the way there, except that there's no voice acting here, so it feels strange,
Let me ask you. You've played Bravely Default 2. How do you think it measures up to that?
Specifically in like in the presentation of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Bravely, almost all of Bravely's cutscenes happen in ways that aren't particularly dynamic, right? It's sort of like the first game where they're sort of in windows talking, right? But it is fully voice acted, right? So sort of they each have different things. Where I would say Alliance Alive in its bigger moments is generally more cinematic, right? But I would say the characters of Bravely 2 are heavily benefited by they have a good voice cast, right? Like I don't want to get too deep into it, right? But like one of the characters named Elvis, right? I think it could very easily come off as like far more like, you know, far less endearing if he didn't have the right voice actor, which they did, right? So, you know, I feel like, for example, in this game, not to get too into spoilers, right? But like there's a character like Robin, right? And he's like sort of a comic relief character, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was like, what voice would they give Robin's? Because if they did give him a voice, it could be either like, oh, this suddenly makes him a lot more charming, like Ricky, for example, in Xenoblade, right? Or it can make
it can go the other way, like Trials of Mana and Charlotte.
Yeah, just a nightmare, right? Like it's just
yeah.
And so it's like that's always the trouble whenever you give a voice besides the one that's in your head, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I didn't really think about Robin having a voice. That might have been a nightmare. So let's generally go over the main outline of the plot. We have our characters, Galil and Azura, our two main characters, who are introduced to you right away. And they live in a world which is overcome by this thing called the Dark Current, which is some kind of like, I don't know how to explain it, like an evil force, or like an evil force that divides the world into multiple parts.
Yeah.
They're stuck in the rain, what's called the Rain Realm, in a town called Svalna, and that's where they've lived their whole lives. And the impetus for the story is basically Azura believes that there's a myth, or believes in a myth that there's a blue sky beyond this dark current. And she wants to see this painting of this blue sky. And that's what gets her to, make Galil travel with her to, start the events of the story, basically.
Yeah. And I think that's nice because it's like already the idea of a blue sky, which is something that's just like you just assume, right? In most
things. You take it for granted.
Right. Is the thing of legend, right? Like people don't believe her when she says there used to be a time where it didn't rain, right? And sort of that obviously can work as a metaphor for just like a time where things were better, right? Like people have just sort of come to accept this is our lay in life, this is what we do, right? Whereas she's willing to sort of believe that things can be better, right? Which I think makes her a charming character, right?
She's a hopeful person in a non-hopeful world, or a very, downtrodden world.
Yeah.
And the reason why the world is so downtrodden is because humans are actually the lowest caste of people. Like, they're basically ruled over by what are called beast folk and demons. And demons and beast folk rule over them because 1,000 years ago, the great human-demon war happened, and then the humans lost, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
And the demons pass it off as humans are chaotic. They're they don't know how to guide themselves, so we will guide them for you, right? The demons are basically portrayed as like Vulcans from Star Trek. They're like highly logical always. They don't like a lot of change. Yeah.
They're long-lived. They focus on order, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So following Azura, Galil and Azura go off to the ancient museum. After searching the world a bit, their realm, and they find that there is a painting of a blue sky, and they find the mirrored cross, which is an artifact that they need to that later becomes important. And they meet a high-ranking demon called Grosser Redan. And this guy is like, it's a boss battle. You're definitely not supposed to win. You stand there and get destroyed, basically. But he's kind of like a hardline demon who only follows the law to the letter 100%, and seeing that the humans are there, that's like a great sacrilege to him, stuff like that.
Yeah. I do think it's funny. There is a unique ending for if you beat him there. They included that.
Is there?
Yeah, which you would have to do an insane amount of grinding, right? But if you want to, if you feel Saf, be careful. If you feel that urge, you can do it and get a special ending.
I did not realize it. It would have to be a bad ending because like there's so much has to happen for.
Yeah, I never saw what it was. I just saw that it exists. So who knows how it plays out? But
well, if you're interested in that ending, go look it up on YouTube.
Yes. Say 30 hours of your life.
Yeah. Just grinding. And basically, that's where the story starts off, and we can get more into the story later on. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, that's how it begins. Azura and Galil face Grossa Radan. Azura loses her eyesight because she has to deflect a magic attack that he does, and it doesn't go well for her. And moreover, I mean, beyond that, you speak about grinding. I don't understand how people grind in this game, really. Because there isn't really leveling.
Yeah.
It's like, it's very, like, it reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy 2 almost, where, like, you get very small incremental upgrades, randomly as you do battles. Mm-hmm. And that's basically how you gain power up.
Yeah. It's almost entirely done through gear and through attacks, right?
Mm-hmm. And positions.
Yeah. And so what that, like you said, that's good insofar as like I don't think you need to grind if you are doing the proper strategies, right? You don't really need to grind any in this game, right? Mm-hmm. The only times that I felt like I needed to, and the times where I saw spikes, is just there's anytime it's sort of like Saga, I think is the closest analogy that I've seen people say.
Yeah, I've heard that said. I've never played a Saga game, but
yeah. So it's like every time you do an attack, you increase your experience with that attack in that position on the grid, right? So there's like attack, support, defense, and then you have a chance of unlocking a new attack for that weapon, right? Or that weapon
called
type.
Awakenings.
Yeah. And then every time you finish a fight, you do get talent points, and those can be used to get upgrades such as costing, like the SP cost of doing an attack is less, right? Or you could even like increase your chance of unlocking new abilities, right? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or you change the amount of aggro you gain or lose in a formation position.
Yeah.
So like if you want a tank person to be in the front, you take his shield. You equip him with a shield first of all, and then you upgrade his talent for that shield to increase, the amount of focus enemies will give him when he's in the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, each character is highly customizable like this. I never like when games do this necessarily because it makes the characters feel less unique. But, I mean, in general, it's fairly solid. I mean, it works well enough.
Yeah.
The thing I don't like as much is that the talents are pretty much identical between all the weapons,
Yeah.
It's the same set of talents for every weapon.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a drag.
Like the uniqueness comes from the awakenings, right? Where like for example, like the staff gives you more, it's less damage focused, more on like debilitating your opponent and stuff, right? And they do. I guess FF7's a fair analogy insofar as like everyone can learn everything, but certain characters are attuned better to being like a tank versus being a magic user. But you can make any composition work, right? And they give you 10 characters to work with, right? Or is it how many total?
12.
12? Yeah, with the optionals.
3 optional characters.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's. Who did you use in your teams? I'm curious.
So go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, the one thing I kind of want to mention. Actually, no, we can talk about who used that because I want to mention something that was completely different about the talents.
Okay, so who did you use?
So, I used my main cast was literally Galil, Azura, Ignace, Vivian, and Tiggy.
Yeah, I used that team for a while. I swapped out several people. Like Ignace, I swapped out for Barbarossa because he had higher HP, and he became the tank of my team. And Tiggy, I swapped for Matilda.
Yeah, that's
because I felt like she was stronger all overall.
Yeah, that's generally. I ended up with basically the same team and almost the same swaps too. So it's because the one thing I will say is that there's a lot of times in this game where, especially if you're like Tiggy, right? Because Tiggy is a unique character in that she's in this big duck mech, which is great.
Which is really good.
And she's the only one that uses like steam weapons, right? Throughout the entire
cannons.
Cannons, yeah. And when she does, like, what that means is that she has a way smaller pool of weapons to draw from. So, like, early on, I got an upgrade for her that made her, like, the strongest by far, right? But then for a lot of the game, she just kept that weapon and slowly fell further and further behind, right?
Yeah.
Until I found another one at the late game that, like, spiked her up again, right? But so it's like because she's, in terms of just, like I said, she's the party member that I would say pops the most when you first see them, right? It's like, oh, look at this person, I want to use them, right? There can be moments of just like, man, that's a bummer that like this character just sort of has to wait in its own different way.
Yeah,
I was telling this to, it was like earlier on as well. It was like literally like Tiggy was just being a nightmare to upgrade because like a lot of our best weaponry comes from like a different mechanic of this game, and as you said before, like the only other weapon that you can get without using that mechanic would be from late in the game, and it's just that one weapon, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And sorry, what was it you were gonna say, else?
The cool thing about Tiggy, one of the reasons why I like her is because she can equip, like you can equip the extra weapons in like her accessories to give her like she can go into different modes, like precision mode or blast mode, which have specific arts to them. So she's the most unique character of the bunch because nobody else can do what she does.
Yeah.
Which I find her pretty cool for that.
Yeah, and then the other things that are unique is humans can use Signomancy, right? Which generally skews more towards the white magic side of things, right? And then the demons in your party, which is Vivian and Ignis, right, can use...
And the Beast Folk.
Yeah.
And the Beast
Folk. So Barbarossa can, too.
And Robin.
And I always forget that Robin can do that, because I think it was a little kid,
yeah.
But
they can use sorcery.
Yeah, they can use sorcery, which is more black magic-y, right? And so what that does mean is like, especially because we said that there was 4 characters there, right? But 2 of them do not have good magic stats, right? So I would not be shocked if Vivian is among the most used characters in the entire player base, because she sort of is the only real option if you want to use it in any significant way, right? Which is for sure good because I like her. I think she's a fun character, but yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I agree. She's a really fun character, and I think all the characters in this game are fun. But we'll get to that eventually.
I mean, I want to say something about the kind of
go ahead
weaponry and stuff, like because I like the level of customization that it has, but like with the amount of depth in terms of, and as well as like the options in terms of like how to like upgrade and level up your characters, in terms of like you have to like focus on the position, you have to focus on the attacks themselves, and you have to focus on like particular talents. Like that one kind of it feels like kind of a little bit overwhelming in regards to like how much you need to do and work in terms of like grinding. Like it doesn't look as though like grinding would be fun because of like just how much you need to work on each separate thing to make a good character.
Well, the thing I was glad about when I started playing this game is that they disincentivize grinding so much, is because like it's not needed, and like the talent point, the amount of talent points that you need to unlock certain things are just so high that like it's almost not even worth it. Like,
and any party member, like even non-active party members can still get talent points, right? And because levels aren't really a major deal, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a couple points in the game where it does say like you don't have to use everyone, split them up, right? Like, don't just put all the people that are good in one party because you're gonna have a bad time. And so, as a result of that, when I first hit there, that was the biggest stopgap that I had in terms of progress, right? I was just like, oh, I need to train everyone up, right? And then when the time came around, I was sort of like, oh, actually, I was fine. Like, I could have done that if I had just played smart. I didn't need to, do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it only happens like twice, but yeah, I thought those were cool moments.
Yeah, I liked them.
Yeah, that one was a big surprise as well, because like it was literally like I just used all my strong characters in one position. Like the first time it popped up, I used the first strong weapon characters.
Right, because the first time it's literally a line, so they have to get through the first party in order to get to the rest of it.
Yeah,
because you're on a bridge.
Then, and then the ones that escape, it's a tougher fight because of the way in which chain battles get set up, and it was all my weaker characters, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be in deep shit, but I ended up being fine despite this, because it's surprisingly easy when you just play this game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this game, I mean, insofar as the characters are customizable, and you actually do have to specialize each character, and like because you have such limited talent points, unless you want to grind a shitload. Yeah. But so long as you have like a person with a shield in front and they're in the defensive stance, you're basically unkillable at that point.
They're very strong.
The formation position and positioning is so important. It's more important. It's probably the most important thing. Yeah. Like, so long as you have a guard person and getting all the aggro and doing the defensive moves, like when you do a block move, it blocks for everybody, so they like cover everybody else's position whenever they get attacked. Yeah. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So long as you have that in place, all you need is one person with a shield, and you'll steamroll basically the game.
Yeah, especially if you have a healer also like healing them every time.
Yeah. There are very few times in this game where you're gonna be overwhelmed.
Yeah, I do, which is funny because I did not do the formation stuff until probably the 40% mark, right? Because part of it is you don't get like a full party of 5 for a while, right?
Yeah.
And when you do, you get a party of 9, right? So suddenly you're having to choose a lot.
Yeah.
But so like because the first time that I felt a spike was when you have to go back to previous areas and sort of like fight bosses at different portions, right? At chapter 20, which is the halfway point of the game, really. And it was, and so like I kept fighting those bosses, and there was a couple where I was like, I was skinning my teeth in it. I was really struggling, right? And then suddenly I was like, oh, I need to like actually like do the mechanics of the game, right? I need to meet it on the level, right? Instead of just trying to like get strong powers. And when that happened, I was like, oh, this game became, 1, a lot easier, but 2, it at least showed to me like if you don't interact with those things, like you will have a bad time. Like it is required, which I think is ultimately what you should do in your game design, right? Is like if you do take full advantage, it should not be that hard. But if you don't, then it will be difficult,
Yeah. And they test you with this when you have to fight any water devil, which is, these big scary monsters that usually show up in water areas, and they chase you down, and they're very fast, so you usually cannot escape them. And when you get to chapter 20, you're set out on the ocean, so you're fighting water devils a lot more than normal. And that's when you have to learn, basically. If you didn't already know, that's where you have to cut your teeth. Yeah.
And speaking of, sorry, I was just going. Speaking of the water devils, there's the dens that you can also find on the sea, right?
Yeah.
Which tie into the chain battles, which Sapphire.
Right. Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say as well is like chapter 20 is really when the game world itself opens up immensely, where you have like a lot more freedom than you normally get, because like from chapter 1 to 20 it's pretty linear in its progression, and
chapter 20 is just you're jumping around the viewpoints of several different groups until they all come together,
and then it's like, well, there it is, there's your party, here's the entire game, just go explore to your heart's content.
And I think that works largely for the structure, right? Because when you have a party of 12, it can very easily have people fall to the wayside, right? And the optional people are obviously they're not required to be there, so they're not as necessary to the plot, right? But for everyone else, by the time that they all come together, you get each of the characters where they're coming from and what their sort of worldview is, right? So when the titular alliance forms, right, like you get like, oh, okay, even if some of these characters aren't talking for a while, right, because there's a lot of, you gotta share the scene a little bit, you still get where they're coming from largely when they do speak up.
Yeah,
right?
because each character had a time to establish themselves as a character.
Yeah.
So you know them before you have to deal with them as a group.
Yeah.
You know them individually, which is really good. But in the back half of the game, after chapter 20, you have all these characters, and basically half of them are never used, or more than half of them are never used, which is kind of a drag. I kind of wish they did more of what they did in the early half, where you had you could split them up, in more long-term ways. But I understand it.
Because I think
yeah, go ahead.
I think that because this is early game spoilers, right? So it's not big. I think the thing that's neat about each of the three groups is, because we mentioned obviously the beast folk and the humans and all this structure, right? Is that you see like three different perspectives on the world, right? You see for Galil and Azura, right, the one that's most easy to relate to, which is like, we're being subjugated, we want to no longer be subjugated, we're going to try to fix this, right? However, right?
Yeah.
And even though really that's more of like what Azura's dad's doing, right? And they're sort of just privy to that. But then you see Vivian and Ignis, who are demons, right? And Vivian's an incredibly high-ranking demon. So, like, she's fully being advantaged by this society, right? But then sort of what we find out is ultimately the demons have been closed off from the world so that they don't see the injustice, so they never know, right? So she sort of learns as she goes, and Ignis in particular learns, like, oh, all the things that we were taught maybe weren't what they seemed, right? And then I thought the most interesting one was Jean, right, who is this guy who's sort of like, I'm not going to be able to change the world, right? I'm going to have to figure out how to work within this system, right? And how can I manage within this system to do the most good that I can for myself and the people I care about, right?
Right.
And then that's sort of like when the Alliance does show up, right? When sort of there is this chance out, he's able to take it, right? But he maintains that trait of being able to like fit into the situation that they find themselves in, right? And he gets actually a lot of like moments in the story where other characters are like, we have to be doing this thing, and Jean's like, actually, I'm just going to be smooth talking our way out of this, everybody, right? Like, I might be screwing one or two of you over along the way, but it's for the greater good, right? And I think that's an interesting role to take in a narrative like this.
I mean, it's certainly interesting to have that represented by Jean, and I do like that the demons, they're not all evil. They're, it's the structure that's evil. It's not the individual demons necessarily.
White privilege.
Yeah.
The beast folk don't get quite as kind of treatment. They sort of like are all portrayed as like greedy and crass and everything else, right?
I mean, most of them, but I mean, then you have Barbarossa and Robin. Well, I guess Robin is called a beast folk. I'm not sure what Robin is actually. Is he a beast folk?
Is he
a penguin?
He's a penguin beast folk. He can do sorcery, so that would imply that he's a beast folk. So,
yeah.
But he is just his own little world. He's his own thing.
He's a family man.
Yeah.
He has his whole family.
And his whole family will be working for you. In the Alliance.
Yeah, so
really not enough time was spent on the beast folk.
Yeah. Speaking of the Alliance, as we keep saying, one of the most important features of this game is building this Alliance. Mm-hmm. The Alliance consists of these guilds that are around the world. There are 5 guilds. They each do a different task, which is the Recon Guild, the Tactics Guild, the Signomancy Guild, the Blacksmith Guild, and the Library Guild. Mm-hmm. And basically, when you get to Chapter 20, the midpoint of the game, you start traveling around the world and building the connections between these alliances. You create, you You recruit the towers that exist currently into your alliance, and that gives you certain boons and buffs and stuff like that. But most importantly, you can build new towers, and you can assign people to those towers, and you sort of fill out the world with all these different guilds, and that's how you level up each guild, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because the guilds themselves, and they each have a role both to play in combat and in just what you can do in the world generally. So when you have something like the Recon Guild, what they do for you when you build enough of them is that they give you more. I mean, you can affect the spawn rates of certain types of monsters, which I'm not exactly sure how that's supposed to help you necessarily because. Yeah. Did any of you use the Recon Guild very much?
I was gonna say, I think a thing that they do well is that they make a bunch of guilds that generally aren't useful. I would say the Recon Guild is sort of the exception, right? In that I think that there's a couple of power-ups. Well, the biggest thing they do is they apply a universal multiplier to talent points you gain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, say you have the maxed out, you're getting double, right, for every single fight that you do. So, I did upgrade them to, like, level, 4 or 5, just because, I thought that getting that was useful, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of, specific unlocks outside of that, I would say that they are among the least interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some, like the Signomancy Guild and, the Smithing Guild, right, that are very much, it's what they say on the nameplate, right? You can learn how to make new weapons, you can learn how to get new spells, right?
Yeah.
And those were fine. But the Tactics Guild, like we said, right, I sort of neglected the Tactics Guild at first. Because I thought, I've set up my tactics now. And then the minute I got to, level, 2 and I saw all the new stuff I got, I was like, oh, no, they might be I should actually do a lot of attention here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And same thing
because of how much the formations and the positions play a role.
Yeah.
I mean, the Tactics Guild allows you to make new positions and new formations.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, making the most of those options makes you very much stronger.
Yeah, because initially it's just this one makes your attack stronger, this one increases your defense, this one increases your speed, right? Or your restoration. And it's
speed and restoration.
Yeah. And it's those are clearly those fit archetypes, right? But then it's a thing where it's oh, what if actually I don't want Barbosa to be entirely defense, right? Because he's a good damage dealer, right? So you can get that upgraded to make a lot more sort of, that's where you get subclasses almost, right? In a traditional RPG, it comes from your formations that you unlock.
Yeah, I mean, using the Tactics Guild and making these hybrid positions, gives you a lot more options. And right from the get-go, each character can equip 2 weapons at once, and you can swap between them at any time. You can use either attack at any moment.
Yeah.
So that that greatly enhances your options at any point. And having those hybrid positions allows you to make use of both weapons.
Yeah.
100%, yeah.
And the other thing that the hybrid weapons let you do, or having the both weapons let you do, is there's the Ignite system, right? Where you typically it's most kicked off when other characters die, right? But it's sort of like a limit, right? Or like a super mode in it where. But the thing you can choose is to activate the ultimate attack for a weapon, but when you do so, you break that weapon until the next time you stay it in, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. You use a final strike, and it's like a super move, basically. It's a limit break.
Yeah. But you are cutting yourself off from half of your moveset, right? If you are using two different weapon types. So I think there was an interesting trade-off, right? I mean, most of the time your characters will only really be dying in a boss fight, so it's not that hard of a choice to make because you're almost always getting healed immediately after. But I thought it was interesting.
Did you guys use Final Strikes that much?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I've used them a fair amount, just to experiment and see what's what, and it's been interesting. Eventually you'll just get moves that are just as strong or even stronger than Final Strikes.
Sure. Yeah.
Which kind of makes them redundant. And at that stage, but otherwise, beforehand, it was fun to just have those backup weapons just to fuck some shit up, basically.
Yeah.
Whenever you needed to.
My thing was is that when they said the weapon will break, I took it literally.
Sure.
I didn't realize you could repair it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm never using this.
Yeah.
Like never.
I had a similar thing where I thought that for a while too. And I will say I used it probably the most in that chapter 20 part where I was in the rough patch. But I didn't realize that you could just revive characters through healing spells for the majority of the game.
Yeah.
Which I think is the thing that generally I think is actually really nice about the game is that it's very much like it feels like they care about your time a lot in this game actually, right?
There's a lot of quality of life features here.
Yeah, like every time you finish a fight, right, all your characters are healed to full, right? So they're sort of but your SP does not heal between fights, and so it sort of is this trade-off of how you make these decisions, right? And then the way that like when a character dies and you bring them back, it's a very low cost to resurrect them, right? It's just a healing spell, but their max HP lowers, right? And every time they get hit while they're down, it lowers their max HP until you go back to an end and rest. Further. Which I think is like a very interesting trade-off, right? Of like you can try to push through, right? Like it's not like it's that high of a getting down once won't ruin a character. Right, but there was a couple times where I was sort of like was playing very fast and loose, and that was the end of a dungeon with half HP, and I was like, well, you're getting swapped out of the team. Someone else is coming in for this fight, actually.
That makes sense. And in that respect, having a large group of party members probably serves somebody who plays that way well.
Yeah.
But I never found myself needing to use that, but I can see how that could be helpful.
Yeah.
The only minor thing that I had in regards to this, like the quality of life features, is that for the longest time, it doesn't have the ability to let you save at any time you want. Which like generally I don't really mind for JRPGs, but when it's a game that's specifically designed for handheld and you see all these features for that they've added just so that it could be just portable, and you don't have something like a save anywhere feature, it just kind of like is one of those things like surely they could have added it in the main menu or something like that. It feels like something that was just obvious but is missing. That's like kind of like a minor.
Well, I mean, if you use the quick save functionality, it's that.
Yeah.
You can save anywhere at any time, and that's why I thought it was so fucking useful.
Yeah.
Like, if you use the quick save, you're completely fine. Like,
it's a funny because it very much feels like a carryover of we have these order gems, right? So you use those to retry boss fights, right? And you can pick those up by collecting around the world. And so like if we just make it where you can save anywhere, why would you not just reload rather than restart, right? But then by including the quick save, which was that in the original, do we know, or did that get added?
I have no idea.
Because that feels almost like a thing that gets added later, right? Of like, playtester said actually this is just mostly annoying, so we'll just include this, right, as the option.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And moreover, you can fight all battles in 4 times speed, 2 times in 4 times speed, which was a fucking godsend. Beautiful. My God,
bless up.
The battles are so slow.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
I basically played like 75% of the game in 4 times speed.
Yeah.
It's like
100%.
So yeah. And one last thing about the battle system. We were talking about the towers a bit. Whenever you're in range of a certain tower, it gives you a certain buff in the middle of a battle, or it does some kind of extra effect. So when you're next to like a recon guild tower, it stuns all the enemies for 1 turn occasionally. When you're next to a smithing tower, occasionally it'll do like a cannon attack on the enemies, which is pretty powerful and hits everybody. When you're next to a library tower, it reduces all defenses, the defenses of all the enemies, and shows their weaknesses and their abilities and their droppable items. When you're next to a tactics guild, it raises the position effects for all of your ally characters. And when you're next to a Signomancy guild, it gives you like a defense buff.
Yeah.
And those are all really, really cool. Like that was like one of my favorite things about building these towers and having them around you all the time.
Yeah. And the thing that I thought was really clever, right, is when you first get the chapter 20 and you get the arc where you can sail around the ocean, right?
Yes.
Whenever you're on the arc, you have all of the guilds at the same time, right?
Because all the towers are on the arc.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so the first time you get into a water devil fight, right, it will at first be like, oh my gosh, this is so hard, right? Like how are we gonna fight water devils all the time, right? But then that sort of is a way to illustrate the power of having those guilds helping you, right? Is
The power of
the
friendship.
power of friendship, which I thought was like a very clever, natural way to sort of, because that's also when you can start building them, right? So they very clearly illustrate this is the value of it, right? These enemies that used to be way harder are now reasonable because you do the effort here, right? You can make that exist for essentially the entire map if you are willing to go out back and do side quests and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of that, really quickly, just when it comes to the guilds, right? A thing that I thought was pretty clever was later on in the game, it can take a lot of individual members to upgrade like a guild to the next level, right?
Yeah.
So there's, I think, over like 100 people you can recruit, right? And some of them are just as simple as go up and talk to someone from a town, right? But not every person can be used to found a tower, right? You have to have guild masters for that. And,
They're divided between guild members and guild masters.
yeah, and those are almost always the result of the bigger side quests, right? Like ones that actually take effort. And so it sort of creates this like, okay, you can get these very easily, right? And they'll be useful for leveling up. But if you want to build towers, you're going to actually have to do more traditional side quests where you're like going out and doing something actually. So it created...
Yeah, and usually the guild masters are people that are fairly significant in the world.
Yeah.
Like, they're like people that you recognize are like, that you've seen before that are like important NPCs. And you can usually recruit like basically all of them.
Yeah.
Like, so it's a really nice feeling to have, like, to go back to earlier areas and see like some person like the sage of the forest. You see her, early on in the game. If you go back and talk to her, she becomes, a guild master for you.
Yeah.
And it's really, really fucking cool.
And speaking of
fucking kill her.
her in that area, right? So did you fight the Dryad? Do you remember?
I did not fight the Dryad.
Nope.
Me either, right? But what I learned was if you do fight her, you just close yourself off to like 6 guild members, right? And there's a bunch of things you can do that just close yourself like there's so many, it doesn't really matter that much, right? But it does feel like at least there's interesting like sort of butterfly effects of some decisions you make early on that you realize later, like, oh, like for example in the ancient museum, like you mentioned, right? There's some weapons you can take, right? I took them because I was like, why not, right? Turns out,
why not?
You close yourself off from like 4 guild members through that, right? And
that makes sense.
And I was sort of like, oh, like okay, like there was, like you're taking the thing now, or you get the bigger benefit later, right? Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the game tries to dissuade you from taking those because if you do take them, you have to fight like an optional enemy that's pretty tough for that stage in the game. I felt kind of bad that knowing now that I missed guild members for that because I mean there's so many towers that I couldn't finish because there are so many places where you can make a tower in the game. And I think I read online that you have to play New Game Plus in order to get everyone, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not
there's a
completely
couple.
Sure
there's like 10 or 15 that are locked behind New Game Plus. So
there's so many tower places. Like,
Yeah.
If you try to 100% this game, it's going to be a little bit overwhelming, I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's basically the tower system, and I think that's a really cool system because it actually has an effect on your battles, as opposed to just you're building up a town. Like in Suikoden, you're just building up a town. Even though we love Suikoden too, you're just building up a town that's not really affecting your battles in the immediate. But here it is, and I thought that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like a lot that almost all the people you recruit can still go back to the arc and you can see them, right?
Yes.
And
it's sort of like a floating town, basically.
Yeah.
You're making your town. Your arc is your town.
Yeah, and it very quickly, like, because when I first got there, I was like, there's so many rooms. Like, why is there so many rooms? And then by the end, I was like, we don't have enough space for all these people, right? And so there was a nice sort of progression to that, which was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, assigning the people to the towers is a really great mechanic, like because each of them have a certain tower type that they can only be part of. Like they each
yeah.
have their own preferences and stuff, and that gives even these minor characters some characterization that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I also like, as a quick last aside on the tower bit, I do like the telegraph stuff that happens. Like the tower people will talk to each other like on the world map, and then that's a fun little bit of.
I also really enjoy if you like build a tower, right, or you haven't been near a tower for a while, right, and that then links into the network, you'll just get like a ton of messages of what's happened while you were gone, right?
Yeah,
and it's sort of like you're reconnecting with the world. You know, you're sort of like, oh, like this is what all has been happening while I was gone. And that's just a cool feeling. You know.
Yeah, the tower linking is pretty fun. I like that.
Yep.
That sense of just linking them all together. You have like this whole map, the world map, and you can see all the towers where they connect and how they intersect.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I guess that's the most part for most of the mechanics. I mean, the last thing we should probably mention is you do get a variety of vehicles in the game, and they're surprisingly deep. Like the way they let you explore the world map, like the ornithopter, like you have to get to a high place and then glide down.
Yeah,
and it's a surprising amount of like almost platforming kind interaction with the world map that you don't often see in a lot of RPGs.
Yeah, like you have to if you get to a high peak, you can look around and be like, what are places I can land on, right? Which is nice. You have to mash real hard to get the max distance, which was funny.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's nice too is like even because like when you get the arc, right, and especially when you get the spoilers, the flying arc, very quickly it's like, oh, is there ever going to be a reason to use anything else, right? And a lot of times you can just fly wherever, but there are still locations if you're really trying to hunt out for the game where you can't land there with the arc, but you can get there with the ornithopter if you are smart with it or if you upgrade it, right? Which you can do through a side quest.
It's like in Final Fantasy VII when you can only get to certain places with Golden Chocobo or something like that.
Yeah.
It's very specialized.
Yeah.
In certain areas, which is it's really nice.
And the other thing
I generally enjoyed that
liked was just like there's a couple of areas that are entirely optional. Remember, you can get there when you get the flying arc, and they don't have any like major significance, but they do kind of spoil the game. Like not really, and that because when I first saw there, I was like, what was with this area? And then I just left. But then after you sort of get to the end of the game and you sort of learn the backstory of characters like Blue and the wider sort of scope of the world.
Oh yeah.
You go there and you're like, oh, that's what that was actually. Like it was in front of me the whole time. That's cool.
There's a lot of interesting things that only become clear to you later on. Just like the temporal space that you go to.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're getting into until you get there. There are a lot of vehicles that you can use, and I generally like that, like the snow rabbit, the power suit for diving into lava, all that stuff. All right, so I think we've spent more than enough time on the general mechanics of the game. Let's get into, I guess, spoiler section. Let's get into it.
Do we want to do recommendations before we get to the spoilers?
We can. Do you want to? Yeah, that's fine.
Just in case, but
What do you think?
I think it's a thumbs up.
Would you recommend this game?
Yeah.
Big thumbs up?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
This is, it's weird, right? Because it's a very untraditional RPG, so if maybe you're not a big fan of RPGs, you might still like this game, I think, actually, which is good.
What makes you think that?
I know a lot of people get pushed off specifically by grinding, right?
Yeah,
and I think that specifically that is a thing. And I think that the quality of life stuff makes it a lot and the battle system being so unlike normal RPGs. I don't think everyone that does like RPGs will like this game, but I think that this is a different style of game than maybe a traditional one, and so there is the realm for people to enjoy it, even if others in the past they haven't liked.
Saf, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like that's generally like my idea as well. Like it's one of the more quicker paced JRPGs out there in terms of like the the way the story progresses, as well as the fact that, as you pointed out earlier on, in terms of like how they kind of dissuade you from grinding, and you don't really need grinding as long as you understand like some of the other mechanics of the game. Like I feel so like I give it a big thumbs up as well, because like it's a game that I would definitely recommend people to play. And it's just one of those things where it's just like it's not the traditional kind of like long you dedicate hours and well some people won't dedicate hours into this fucking game.
What a person to say those words.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people will dedicate it.
I mean, for reference, I've played this game for over 120 hours, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me and Ills both took like
no, some people won't
25
have to
or
do it.
something.
like 30 hours,
30
basically.
hours, yeah. So just a big difference.
Yeah.
That's just a wee bit. Yeah, so like it's not something that needs that much effort, but like it's something that's quick to pick up, quick to play, perfect place to be on when it comes out on the Switch, and then everyone can enjoy it, and as well as like maybe Android as well. It's actually really good. I would recommend anyone who wants to jump into JRPGs or who is a fan of JRPGs get this game.
Yeah, I agree. I also recommend this game for all the reasons you said. We'll get into more in the spoiler territory. But yeah, all those things are pretty cool. I definitely agree. So with the spoiler-free recommendations out of the way, let's jump into the spoilers. What did you guys think of the plot of this game?
I'll have to say, you know, a lot of the times JRPGs, I could say, stray from the path, right? Insofar as a story will start in a place that is semi-relatable, right? And sort of without even realizing it, the story will get so big, and it's the classic thing if you fight God, right? That type of thing, where it sort of becomes incredibly unrelatable in this way that's just like it's so grand. This game, like it does sort of enter that, towards the end of the game, they're dumping a lot on you, right, in terms of the backstory. But for our character...
the final boss is the Dark God Machine, so, yes. I mean, close enough.
But the thing I think that's nice is, like, the characters stay grounded, right? Insofar as, like, what do you want to start the game with? You want to make this world a better place, right? And Gleal wants to make it better for Azura, right? Azura wants to prove that this thing used to be true. And that's still basically their end goal at the end of this game, right? Now, obviously stuff happens, right? And things change from there. But I think that because of that, sort of, even when the God stuff comes into play, I don't feel like it's like, oh, here we are again, right? Like...
Well, I mean, to that point, I think the characters, specifically your party, are the strongest part of this game. Yeah. 100%. I really enjoyed spending time with these characters. Kuwalsa, the main antagonist, he is not good. He's very boring. No. He's very rote. I mean, he's fine because, he's just a typical JRPG villain, but he's not interesting at all, basically.
Like...
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the world of the demons is interesting, right? Like the little bits and bobs they drop, right? Where you finally like, oh, demons were actually humans that like, in their mind evolved or whatever else, right? But that's been erased from history, things like that, right? Like are all interesting, but then when it's ultimately I want to destroy and recreate the universe, that's like. Well, it doesn't tie into any of the...
Fucking snore.
Yes, this doesn't tie into any of the world you've made. If there was something that he was doing that was like, this plan had been enacted 1,000 years ago, to like get to this point, and it's just like, that was the plan, right? Right. Like I think is Radon? Is that how you say the name?
Grosser Radon?
Yeah. Like, that, that sort of thing of, like, the underling that comes to realize that, like, maybe they were serving an unjust cause, right? It's also kind of tropey. But I thought that it worked ultimately, that he didn't, like, be like, I'm your best friend now, team, right? Like, he didn't, like, fully go good guy, but he sort of, like, it made sense with his worldview from the beginning. It's not like he completely changed. He just was exposed to more information and was able to then make a different decision, you know?
Yeah, I do like Grocer Radon. I actually do like him a lot more than Kowalski.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like a Judge Dredd archetype, like I am the law, you know, the law is absolute.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But like it is satisfying to see him, you know, attack against Kowalski at the end.
Yeah.
I do like that part.
The thing about that, like the kind of like the other demons that you deal with, like Grossa is definitely the best out of them, but it's kind of because like I like the idea, the way his story developed more than the other three, or the other two, I guess, stories developed. In that, like I like the idea of like them sticking to the idea of like, is their way of living, or is their like philosophy of like worldview correct, and just attacking that. Whereas like with Kowalski and even Rouge, it feels as though that sort of idea and that sort of philosophy is kind of abandoned for like some sort of greater fucking godlike fucking thing.
Yeah, it's just it's chaotic basically. It's no longer the, you know, strict lawful, you know, strictly logical thing that you've come to think about the demons.
Yeah.
It's just like they're like aberrations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I would have loved to see more of like Grossa's philosophy, like through other demons, rather than just have it stuck to him.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad, but oh well. Here we are.
Because I think it's worth mentioning, because I would say really, even though Azura and Galil are the main characters, the ones that it ends on, right? I would say that really, like, Vivian is sort of like, she's the most useful party member narratively, right? Like, there's so many times in the narrative they pull the thing of, hello, my name is this, and people are suddenly like, whoa, what the fuck, right? Like, because, and sort of like, she's the one that, like, I liked her probably the most in terms of, like, from a narrative sense, because she's, like, her and Azura are the ones that objectively, like, lose things over the course of the story, right? Even though they both get them back in the end, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But sort of, like, this idea of, like, for her, I'm going to invoke a cursed name, everyone. Please be ready with it. Like, Naui, right? In Fire Emblem. Like,
oh god.
Like there's
she is 1,000 years old, or close enough.
That's right. There's a lot of 1,000-year-old characters, right? That it's a well-covered topic, and sort of like what happens to you when you've lived that long, right? Everything starts to feel more trite, right? And Vivian sort of very much has that affectation at the start of the game, right? Like everything sort of feels a little bit like a game, a little bit like it's like, oh, isn't this interesting, right? Rather than like, this is something I'm taking deathly seriously, right?
Right.
But sort of over the course of the game, she does what they wanted to do with Naui, which is why I brought her up, which is she sort of is like, no, I've made bonds with people, and like, you know, she's going to outlive all of them, right? Except for Ignis, I guess, right? But it doesn't mean that it's still not worth working to make their lives better while they are here because you care about them, right? Which I thought was just, you know, it was a lot of times they don't get to be the main character of a story, right? And so for her to sort of get to have that kind of prominence, I think was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Vivian definitely has like a huge role in the story for sure. Like, if she's not like, I mean, I would say Galil and Azura like 1 and 2. She's definitely 3. Yeah. You know, she's number 3 on the list. And like you said, like she just comes at it originally from just being like interested in it, but it's not like affecting her in any way because she lives on Demonia where all the demons live, and you know all this is kind of, you know, just for fun basically. But as she realizes the extent of the what Kowalski is doing and how the dark current is actually getting worse, even though it was only, you know, supposed to be have a certain effect and not be getting worse, she realizes that, you know, the demons have actually been responsible for truly terrible things.
Yeah.
And Ignis, he plays like a he kind of always has her back, but he's always trying to like get her to go, go back home, stop being wild.
Yeah, he's our I don't know, like he's our servant, I guess. Or
Yeah.
I don't know what the relationship was fully, because like he seems to be at his service, but she seems to like kind of like go at her a lot for not just following regular demon rules.
It's like they're a servant, but they're like, she clearly values him a lot and he values her a lot, right?
Yeah, they have a personal relationship. It's not just duty bound.
Yeah. And like that's the thing that I appreciate, right? We can sort of get to it. Is in the first third of the game, when you're meeting all the different sets, right? There's always a guy and a girl, right? And outside of Galil and Azura, it's largely platonic for all of them. Right? And like I was like, are they just gonna have at the end like, and all of them got married, right? But it's like, no, they just sort of they live their like, like they're just two people that value each other a lot, and it doesn't have to be a romantic thing, right? It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And I thought that's nice, because this story doesn't have room for that. It would feel shoved in.
Yeah.
When that's not what the narrative is about.
And also, I mean, they also kind of clicked with other characters. I know Ignis and Rachel have like a thing.
Yeah.
Like they have like a rapport to them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think.
And them dancing and partying all night is fucking great.
Yeah.
They do a good job with Ignis of slowly thawing him out over the course of the game, right? To when he's facing down Kowalsa, right? And like he's like, he refuses to stand down, right? Like Vivian's like, leave, right? Like, go, get out of here, right? He's like, I know I'm not leaving you, right? But also he has that sort of vibe of like, also you've done wrong, right? Like he also eventually gets with the program, right? Which I think is nice, because he was sort of one of the longest holdouts, but. So when he does join along, you're like, oh, okay, like we're all on board now,
Yeah. I think one of the best parts with Ignis, and especially, seeing him interact with Tiggy. Tiggy's just like this young girl who's actually super smart. She's like a prodigy who's been studying the Dark Current like her whole life. Yeah. And she just constantly bullies the shit out of him, basically.
She always calls him a dog.
It's so... Yeah,
100%.
It's so funny. Like she has such a good rapport with Vivian, but like every time Ignis speaks, is like, shut the fuck up. Who cares?
The adults are talking. You see which is funny because she's 12, right? The other thing I liked about Tiggy is like when they're trying to decide the leader, right? Galil gets it because he's protagonist boy, and it's like, okay, I guess, right? But reasonably, everyone turns to Tiggy at first. They're like, you're the one that knows how this ship works. You're the one that's done the most research in the Dark Current, right? It should be you. And she's like...
the smartest one of all of them.
Yeah, and she's like, I'm not a people person. Like, I know I'm not. And if we're doing an alliance, you need a people person. And I was like, you know what? You could have very easily just brushed past it and just immediately gave it to Galil, right? But they acknowledged the character, and she acted in a way that I thought was, like, totally in line with what she would believe.
Yeah.
Right?
That makes a lot of sense.
100%.
So I thought that worked out.
I mean, I feel like this is definitely like my favorite part of the game is just having these people interact, and like I just really enjoyed every time they would be together.
Yeah.
Which was all the time basically at the end of the game.
Yep.
Yeah, it almost made me want more of that, like just more exploration of it, just because of how well it's been done so far. Because
I will say I feel like they are better than the plot they are in.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like I enjoyed them a whole lot, but if they were part of a story that was a little bit more engaging, a little bit more interesting, I would have appreciated this game a whole lot more. Because I feel like there are moments in the game which are very interesting, but for the most part, it's kind of not. Like, you have, like, when you try to save Wyatt from the Bastille, that's, like, one of the high points of the game.
Yeah.
When you have trying to defend Hakurai Castle in the Snow Realm.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite part of the entire game, is that part.
100.
And one of my favorite parts was flying the wyverns in the storm to get to the Rainbow Pillar.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was super cool.
Well, I think it's interesting.
You remember that part?
Yeah. Because I think it's interesting, because those are definitely, like, set pieces that you're doing, right? Because a lot of the narrative is essentially a MacGuffin quest, right? Like, you're going after the ether gears, right? And what those do, right, is sort of not super, like, you know, it's not like it's like, I think that it's
They keep the black current running, basically.
And I do think it's like neat when you go back to. I love when games go back to an old area and recontextualize it, right? When you come back stronger and other things, right? So for a lot of Chapter 20, it's that. You're going back to the earlier parts of the game, right? And like suddenly when you fix the rain realm and it's not raining anymore, you're like, oh man, look at this. Like, isn't this fun? Right?
Yeah.
But, you know, it's very much like the game doesn't linger a lot, right? Like you do the thing, you move on, right? And sort of like, sometimes I wish it almost did pause and take a breather, right? To sort of like let the story settle a little bit. I don't know if I really have a great answer on what they should have done, but I definitely felt like when I got to the end, I was like, and this is kind of the point of the game, right? Like they talk about, like, this is one area of 18 that the demons control, right?
Yeah, which is actually super interesting to think about.
But it feels like
because go ahead.
You know, but it feels like that's why the God part really sticks out, right? Because it's like it could have very easily just been, you know, they didn't overthrow the entire universe, right? They didn't like save the galaxy. They made the lives for the people they know better, right? And that could have just been it, and it would have been satisfying, right?
It seems like the demons have control of the universe or some large swath of it because their whole world, the whole world that this game takes part in, is only Area 18 and their empire. So what does that even mean? Like, you get no sense of what that means, you know, in larger context, basically.
Because it's like, how big.
But I also think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it leaves you wondering, right? Which is good. Because a lot of times in JRPGs, you sort of learn too much of how the world works, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, you basically beat down every possible enemy there is, and there's nothing left. Like, you become God, basically.
Yeah. Where in this game, it's sort of like, these people, like, they'll probably be written in the history books, right? But it's not like, you know, like, they all sort of go back to life at the end of this, and, like, it makes sense that they would, you know?
And they weren't trying to destroy all demons because, you know, Vivian and Ignis are demons and those are, you know, good guys.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you can imagine that the other areas are run in a better way or something like that.
Because they talk a lot about the Council of Eight, right? For the demons. And most of them are dead, right? Is the actual answer, right? Because they've been slowly killed, and that's when you meet Blue, right? And Blue gives you a lot of this stuff, right? Which is what I alluded to earlier, right? Is like, when you go to like the Dryad area, one of them is like, we used to play with Blue all the time or whatever, one of the little kids of the forest, and I was like, oh. And then like later you go to where it's in the caged realm where like they make monsters, like they're animating the like suits of armor, and it's like they mention Kowalsa, they mention Blue, and they mention Tiggy's ancestor, right? And you're like, oh, that's actually like that was a cool thing that I realized later, right? But like, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff that they throw at you, but in terms of like what you do, it's very much like it's very ho hum, I would say, right?
It's very straightforward. I'd say. Like there are very little surprises. You know, there are no twists that you're gonna see. Like, as soon as you see Kowalsa, you know he's a bad guy. As soon as you see Rogue, you know he's a bad guy. So,
yeah, which
like
I'm kind of okay with, just because so often RPGs try to play coy about who's the bad guy, right? I mean, I always bring up FF10, right? Here's Seymour. Look at this evil-looking motherfucker. But we're not going to tell you he's evil until the 60% mark, and you're like, come on, you know? Like, in this game, it's very much what they show you is what you get, for better or for worse.
I mean, I get that. I can tell, like, you know, sometimes some games do it badly, and, you know, it's not as appealing. I feel like this game, like, there wasn't, I don't know, like, there wasn't, like, a hook there to keep me invested in the plot other than the characters. You know what I mean? What they were going through, it wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't that interesting to me.
If I were to compare it to the last Game Club game, right? Because they share writers. Suikoden 2, I would say, in terms of, like, the main party, like it really only gives attention to like 7 to a similar amount of characters that Alliance Alive does, right?
Yeah.
But there is sort of an idea that grounds it, right? Of like, this game is about war, it's about the cost of war, right? And so it has that layer on top of the good character writing. Whereas Alliance Alive just has that. There's no wider sort of like theme or idea guiding the narrative outside of we're going on an adventure, right? Like, you know, with people that you like.
Maybe what's missing to me is that, like, you mentioned earlier that only Azura and Vivian, you know, really take losses. But, like, nobody else really does that much. And I feel like because that doesn't happen, like, it's not as impactful.
Yeah.
I think that could be a part of it.
Yeah. Because
I guess so,
they do, I think, a good job selling the world as being distraught, right? Like, I appreciate the Crystal Realm, right? Because, like, the Crystal Realm is generally, they're more advanced than the rest of the world, it feels like, right? But because they made a deal forever ago with the demons, right? Like, and it sort of is very much like, you know, they never explicitly say it, but sort of is Gene's philosophy manifested, right? You made a deal, you made your life better for your people, but at the end of the day, they're still going to come for you eventually, right? Like, you're just staving off the inevitable, whereas in the Snow Kingdom, they've been fighting continually for hundreds of years, you know? And so it's like, those are things that I think are interesting, right? But those are characters that you don't go on the adventure with, you know? Like, they're just, they're in that part and they stay in that part, basically, you know? Which I feel is the thing that limits it.
And I feel so like that was like kind of like they did the thing with like optional characters like Shiki, Matilda, and Robin, and I feel so like because they were optional, they kind of like missed the opportunities of like kind of like exploring those kind of themes a little more because they're from those particular areas, and they could have represented those themes much better through those characters, but they haven't really done that, or I guess they didn't have enough time to do that, and that's I feel so was a little bit of a missed opportunity to have that done.
That's one that feels like it would have been nice in a HD remaster. You know, like just here's a little Shiki side quest. Here's a little Matilda side quest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin, I will say he's just fucking hilarious. Like, even if he doesn't get like any more context or quest line to him, he's so funny.
He's just a good comic relief guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He's constantly interjecting. He's so funny.
He's so self-assured. That's what's so good. It's like, who should be the leader? He's like, it's me. Yeah. It's obviously me. I'm so good at this. And everyone's just... And the best part is, like, it feels like they wrote the scenes... They wrote him so the scenes could happen without him being there and it wouldn't feel strange. But suddenly it's just a very funny joke that Robin's just like, why does no one listen to me? Why is no one paying attention? Right? Because everyone just no-sells him the whole time, you know? It's very funny.
Yeah, he's great. I guess we've run a little bit long, so maybe we should wrap this up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was our overview of the Alliance Alive. I guess now the only thing left to do is put it on the list.
The list.
All right, you can check the list in the pastebin below. And looking at the list, I'm going to pass it off to Saf. Tell me what you think.
Can I just say, Will and I just addressed that with completely different energies.
Well, what I realized the last time I recorded the podcast was if I scream the list, the noise gate will kill me. You won't hear me scream it. So now I'm going to have to figure out other things to do for the list.
He's going to go a different way with it.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would normally do is I would normally compare it to Suikoden Do for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just like, I don't think it is better than Suikoden 2. I like Suikoden 2 more, better than this one.
I think we all do.
Yeah, so like, the next thing to do is just to see how much less I like it than Suikoden 2.
Well, there's a lot of range in there, so.
Okay, let's start from The Last Story, because that's a club game that we've all played, and the regular game club has played recently.
Well, I've never played The Last Story.
It sort of has...
Yeah, okay. I've never played The Last Story, but sure, yeah. We can start from there.
Oh, you haven't played this?
No.
Oh, I thought you have. My bad.
So,
Okay.
so how do you two feel about it, though? Because that's enough to know.
I think I would put it below the last story, but I think we're getting closer to a range. Is what I mean. So, Sap, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that. Because, like, the last story had, like... Because, like, the last story is the other game that does have great character moments. And they do, like, dedicate, like, I think, side stories to just those particular moments and those characters and just interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel so, like, the last story... As fun as this one was, I feel so the last story does more for their characters and them interacting with each other. And then, obviously, softening you up to those characters than this game does.
Right.
So I would definitely put it below the last story.
So
sure.
at least below the last story. Will, what do you think about below Okami?
That was where I was looking at. Because I think I would put it higher than Tomb Raider 2013 and Captain Toad. Okami is like, I really like Okami is the thing, but there is like there's a lot of pacing problems in Okami, or not even the last third. That's discussed a lot, but like the opening of that game is super slow. Yeah. Right? There's a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
I would say it's a game that does not value your time as much as this game does. But it does have really strong suits. So just I think that there's a lot of really good stuff in there. How would you feel right below Robobot?
I think that's good.
So 75.
I'm cool with that.
Or 76, I guess this would
I also I kind of wanted to ask about Octopath, but I assume we all wanted above Octopath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bravely Default.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think this is a marked step up from those games, in my opinion.
Okay. So below Robobot.
Sap.
Okay. Yeah. Fine.
That seems to be a little bit begrudging.
Because you know my feelings about Robobot.
Sap on Kirby.
A particularly impressive game.
Oh, you hate Robobot.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sap does not like Kirby games in general. So.
He's a great pink puff, man. Leave him alone.
Yeah. So there it is.
Well, why don't you love Kirby? He loves you.
Does he?
He just wants to eat
Kirby?
He loves everyone.
I guess Kirby does love everyone. It's just sometimes it's hard to tell.
I mean,
I'm sure he loves everyone like he loves food.
He is a baby, and this baby loves you, but sometimes you're like, this baby might also want to kill me. It's hard to...
I mean, if you're in America, he hates everyone.
He's mad.
He hates everyone. But, yeah.
All right. So there it is.
All right. So there it is. We've put the Alliance Alive at number 76. Surrounding it is Super Mario Maker at 74. Kirby Planet Robobot at 75. The Alliance Alive at 76. 77 is Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, and 78 Tomb Raider 2013. And that's it for the list. Does somebody else want to do the plugs? My throat hurts.
Sure. If you enjoyed this, we do other shows on a more regular basis, so you can make sure to get those every Monday when we do the Jump Up Supercast, where we talk about news of the day. We do various other things. We add games to the list. That's how we got to 252 games or whatever it is now on the list. On every other Thursday, we do the Jump Up Supercast Game Club. Ills is on there with Brandon and Noah, where they talk in depth about a game that is shorter than 25 hours, right? That's why we have the extra, so we can go longer.
Yeah.
And those are... What's the most recent one that you guys did?
Shit. Well, the one that would have been out by now is Return of the Obra Dinn.
Return of the Obra Dinn. And then coming up, you'll have New Super Lucky's Tale. So...
Yes.
Those you can listen to those. You can make sure to always get those by either following us on your podcast service of choice, by subscribing to us on YouTube, and by following us on Twitter at twitter.com/jumpupsupercast, where we post whenever episodes go live, as well as when we go live on twitch.tv/jumpupsupercast, where various people play video games, mostly Mina and Brandon, but you can make sure to know when we go live by following us on there as well. And then also the Facebook and a Patreon, where if you are willing to give $1 a month, you can get in the Discord server, talk with us, and submit to the Jump Up Supercast Game Club patron pick. Your game can be put into the pot to be played by Brandon, Ills, and Noah, and who knows what you can make them play. I mean, I guess you could know because you would be the one to decide. But those are all there if you wanna engage with them. We would sure like it a lot.
All right, and well, this has been the Jump Up Supercast Game Club Extra. We hope to be back soon at some point. I'd like to thank Will and Saf for their participation, their continued participation. I'm going to make you play another game soon enough. And that game will be John Dark for the PSP.
Oh, baby.
So look forward to that at some point in the future.
Did they ever release that on
maybe.
PC?
I don't think so.
I don't think they did. No,
I'm pretty sure it's
There's
PSP only.
PSP.
But
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll find a way.
we will find a way.
Find a way.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.